Bruce, you're ready. Russ, I think you're about ready. Hopefully everybody is back. I do want to welcome a couple other people who popped in after we started the meeting, and that's Larry Smith from Division 10, who's the current superintendent over there on the other side of the state, and Bob Belt. I saw him pop in, the former Division 10 superintendent from the Lexington area as well. So welcome to them. I didn't see anybody else pop in that.
Jim, actually, I admitted.
Oh, Jim Petro came in too. That's right. That's right. It's after wake up time out on the West Coast now, I suppose. So that's good. All right, Russ, if you'll do a quick intro and then off to Bruce.
Well, again, please, everybody, welcome Bruce McKeown. Obviously, a diehard Santa Fe guy, and we've always enjoyed his previous presentations. So, Bruce, we're ready to enjoy this one. So take it away, please.
Thank you, Russell, Ron, and Fred. Appreciate the invitation and the chance to talk about trains again with you guys. I picked a couple more projects I've worked on lately in addition to what I showed you last June. And since Bob Finkrone had a presentation about some of his loads for his open top cars, I kind of ran around my railroad and saw what I had. And this isn't to upstage him or anything. It's just to show you some of the variations in what's available either commercially or that you can make up yourself for loads for open top freight cars. And without any further ado, let's blast into it here. Back in the early 90s, I was buying rolling stock to fill out the space on railroad that I had then. And I didn't pay a lot of attention to the configuration of some of this equipment. And lately, over the past 4 or 5 years, I've started getting more particular. I'm looking at each piece of equipment I've got to really determine, is it correct for my 1967 railroad? And I looked at some refrigerator cars and I found some easy to correct errors. And with the help of a very esteemed ice bunker refrigerator, Pacific fruit industry kind of person you have in Division 8 there, I was able to resolve these errors. And there are 3 simple ones. And here's a picture of a Fruit Growers Express refrigerator car. It came from Intermountain, right out of the box, a little weathering, and I put it on the railroad. But what I determined is, over the years since this car, the model of this car represents, and 1967, things changed. One of them is that the lines they used to put above and below the reporting marks in the car number went away. The periods between the reporting marks went away. They don't use those anymore, usually, unless it's a specific case. And if you look closely at reweigh dates or new dates and repack dates, they were out of date too. So instead of repainting the entire car and going for all new decals to put on it here, a technique I came up with a few years ago with some other cars that I knew had incorrect markings on them. And this is only if the car has printed information on it, put on with a printer. You can take the hobby knife, the tip of the hobby knife, and very carefully you can scrape those print marks off. And on these cars, I went through, and it takes several minutes per car. You don't rush into this. I scraped the period off the A, right after the A off of this car. I went on to clear it off the R and the T, and I took the lines off the top and the bottom of the information there. And that took care of that problem. And if you don't go down through the base layer of paint, you probably never would see it. And if you looked at it and did see something, a tiny bit of weathering or a little touch-up paint will probably take care of the error. For reweigh dates and for reporting or general repack information, I made a mask. I took a little 3x5 file card, cut a hole out of the middle of it, and put masking tape around it to the size of where I wanted to overspray that information. Now this picture is not pressed down onto the car, but I think you get the idea of what you do to correct it. And then with some decals to put new reweigh information on, maybe painting an off-color block where you want to change the information. It comes out looking like this. So I went through, there's about 6 or 7 cars I had to do this to, and they've all been corrected to an appearance that is correct for my 1967 railroad. And I again want to thank your secret member. I can tell you I won't tell you his name, but his initials are Barry Christensen. So thanks for your help again, Barry. I had another refrigerator car. This is a Sunshine kit, and I rate Sunshine kits as probably some of the best you can do out there for detail and accuracy. And I built this Pacific Fruit Express refrigerator car per the plans and per the information that was included with the kit. And later on, I found out that this scheme was pretty much out of phase or out of use by 1967. Again, that's when my railroad is set. So short of repainting the entire car and going with new decals, I didn't want to dispose of the car because it's such a good quality car. I went to well, here's what it should look like first. This is the scheme that was in effect starting in 1960. And by then, PFE had repainted just about every car they had into this scheme. A technique I've used on other cars that I wanted to change or alter after they were built is removing the decals first. And even if you have oversprayed the decals with a flat finish or even a gloss finish or weathering or anything like that, if you take a piece of masking tape and put it over the decal area and then use like an embossing tool or the tip of a ballpoint pen or anything rounded but firm and press down and rub it back and forth, just like you would use a dry transfer or something like that, rub it on that and then lift the masking tape off, and generally the decal will come off with it. You may take 2 or 3 tries, especially on big decals. There was a couple spots here, my reway information and a little bit about the weights and one of the bit about the dimensional data here, not dimensional, but weight data here, wouldn't come off. That was so minor that I really didn't worry about it. These open spots here is where I yanked the tack boards off. They didn't belong in that position anyway. And then you repaint the car. And we repainted it in the correct scheme. It had orange sides, black ends, and an aluminum colored roof. And that took care of upgrading the car as far as the base before putting the decals on. And then with a set of decals, you go to work, put them on like that, finish the car in whatever kind of appearance and weathering you want, and you've got a perfectly good car set for the time frame you may want. And in my case, I brought it up to 1967. All right, I included a short video this week, or this month, whatever we're in today. I have a built-up refrigerator train. It generally runs as a continuous block all the time. Occasionally, I'll take a car or two out and run it in a regular freight or a situation like that. But what you're going to see is I have 4 locomotives, in this case, pulling a train, made up of the locomotives I've got in my group. 3 of them are GP35s. 1 is a U25B. And the first car you're going to see is called a test car. That's the Santa Fe name for basically a dynamometer car. And this is a car I built. And I showed you about that live back in 2018 when I gave you a presentation before. And then as mechanical refrigerators come into being, the railroads tend to segregate them in separate groups within a refrigerator car train if they were hauling both types. The mechanicals would be at one group and every one of the ice bunkers would be in another group. So there's 4 mechanical refrigerators following the lead on this train. And then foreign road cars, not native to the railroad you're showing them on, sometimes were also grouped or classified separately also, apart from the home railroad cars. So after the 4 mechanicals, there's 14 foreign road cars. And then after that, 35 Santa Fe ice bunker refrigerator cars, then the way car. So there's 54 cars plus a way car rolling by in this particular train. So here we go. Takes about a minute to go by. GP35, U25, a couple more Jeep 35s, the test car, 4 mechanicals, and then the 14 foreign road ice bunker refrigerator cars. And then the 35 Santa Fe ice bunkers I got running as a group. And this train runs pretty much intact anytime I want to run it on the railroad. It can go from either end. I can pull the ice bunkers first, or I can pull the mechanicals first. I can use any of the groups of locomotives I've got to pull it, all accurate for the time frame and for the use they're pictured here. All right, video complete. Another car I recently built, this came out of Sunshine. It's another one of those urethane kits. It's a BX class car, BX26, BX standing for box. And it was a Duryea underframe equipped car. And the Santa Fe used a lot of Duryea underframes. They used them on boxcars. They used them on refrigerator cars in a couple classes. They even used them on cabooses. And it's an early type cushioning underframe, and it relied primarily on friction rather than hydraulic or spring cushioning. And it did a good job for the time it was available in there. And then when more efficient hydraulic and spring cushioning systems came along, a lot of these cars went by the wayside. But if you don't know what you're looking at, especially on a model car where you rarely see the bottom of the car, you wouldn't really know that it was equipped with this type of an underframe. So here's the car pretty much built up. And the differences you could see if you happen to look at the bottom is the side sliding center section. Now on the model, it's not functional. It doesn't really slide, but you see in essence one channel within another channel of the underframe on the bottom of the car. The cross members on this particular case are open to allow the movement of that center sliding section. And true with most every cushioned car of some kind, the draft gear extends out from the end of the car a little further. Here it is. I've got it all primed, ready to go prior to painting it. But there's one other thing you can look at to see. Of course, the coupler bucket, the draft gear extended out a little bit, and some of the visible components of the cushion underframe are visible. The side there where some of the mechanism, the sliding mechanism is anchored, and a couple of little guide strips on top of the coupler pocket up there. Paint the car up, put it all together, and this is what it looks like. And again, probably the only thing you'd see from this view is it looks like the coupler pocket extends a little further, which it's supposed to do. BX26 Duryea underframe boxcar. Another car I built recently, and this was for a friend, the Canadian National and the Canadian Pacific Railroads had ice bunker refrigerator cars like many of the American railroads did, but they had a whole fleet of cars that were different in configuration in that instead of having the ice bunkers at the ends of the car, it had them underneath the roof, and their ice bunker ran pretty much the full length of the car. Now to get ice in to fill the whole length of the ice bunker, they designed the car with 8 ice hatches on the roof rather than the typical 4, 2 at each end for the ice bunkers. And there was a scientific principle behind this. Cold air, of course, flows downward. By designing their ice bunker car with 8 ice hatches and the bunker on the top, the cars cooled faster, they maintained a more even temperature, and air circulating fans weren't required. Now, this was in the early days of even thinking about air circulating fans, but they could keep the car cool without them. A couple visible spotting features. If you can see the roof line, you'll find 8 ice hatches up there, 4 on each side. And the height of the side door is reduced because that ice bunker sits underneath the roof and the interior roof lining of the car is a little lower. So they couldn't have the doors opening and walk right into a roof there. So if you ever happen to see one, and I don't think there's any left in the world, that's what it would look like. Testing programs proved and provided the idea that the overhead ice bunkers worked more efficiently until after World War II and fans came along. They have both electrically driven fans and mechanically driven fans. And when those proved functional and reliable shortly after World War II, a lot of the cars at that point were either converted to or built with fans in the system and ice bunkers. And the overall effect was it kept the interior temperatures as they desired they would be, even and at a certain temperature they were trying to achieve. Well, why did the Canadians stay with overhead ice bunkers while the American railroads didn't really go in that direction at all? They had ice bunker reefers up on the 2 main Canadian railroads too, but the overhead ice bunkers did a better job when they were shipping meat products to export ports where the car might sit quite a while before it gets unloaded into the ship. And they wanted to maintain the temperature level in the car at the provided or the appropriate value, and they found that the overhead bunkers did it, especially if you had to depend on a fan that either needed mechanical drive and the car wasn't moving, or if you needed an electric drive and the car wasn't moving to create the electricity. And a little side thing in there about the temperature in the winters in Canada, a lot of times they really didn't need fans to keep the interiors at an appropriate level. So here's what the kit looked like. Originally, a company called Truline Trains, which I had never heard of, produced this kit. And if you look on eBay, occasionally you can still find one available there. But some other general comments on some of the discussion boards, they kind of badmouth the True Line Train model. I don't know why, there were no details provided. But then Funaro and Camerlengo came along and either took over the model or created a new one that I would rank of equal quality with Speedwich Media, Westerfield, Sunshine, Yarmouth, some of the other resin car modelers. Looks pretty much the same. The quality of the castings and the molds was good. So putting the car together, typically the body of a box style car is made up of two sides, two ends, that are held together with butt joints, and you use ACC on them and they seem to hold well. But I wanted to be a little more sure that any car I build of this style is going to stay together through any handling it might have. And in the corner, I started putting little styrene angle stock, and that reinforced that butt joint. It gave it two more gluing surfaces to hold it together and to be assured that it was never going to come apart on you. There's pretty much everything built up. I have the body built up, two sides, two ends, and the roof on it. The floor is sitting just in front of it, and the roof walk, of course, will go on the roof. And that's ready for painting. But if you look closely at the floor, there's an object there that probably no one, I'm going to bet, on this group has ever seen before. And if you have, you've got a better, you've had better experience than I have on this one. Some ice bunker cars, when they were traveling in very cold weather, would have a heater put down in the ice bunker to keep the car contents from freezing. And those heaters could either be alcohol or kerosene powered. These particular Canadian built cars used a charcoal heater that was suspended below the underframe of the car. And that kept the interior at the level where to keep the products from freezing when they didn't want that to happen. Charcoal heater. There's the car all painted up. Like many of the other cars I've showed you, if the car is going to be all one color, it's easy to paint it put together. If the car, like my refrigerator cars, the Santa Fe has, or the PFE cars, which components come in 3 different colors, I find those easier to paint separately. But this one was painted in the Canadian National number 11 gray. The underframe was black. You put the car together, you put the decals on it, and that's what it looks like. Faithful with the 8 hatches on top, the reduced height door, a paint scheme that reflects the decals and everything appropriate for the period, and you put it in a realistic setting, that's what it looks like. Canadian National 8-hatch ice bunker refrigerator car. Moving along, let's talk about loads for open top freight cars. And again, this is just what I gleaned looking around my railroad. It's a representative view of some of the loads I've either made or acquired to put on my open top cars. There's a picture out of one of my Santa Fe books back in World War II. They were hauling wings for B-29s on flat cars like that. That's not the full wing. There's more extension that goes out right and left, and those parts were added later during the assembly process. First, let's define what an open top car is. Basically, for bulk commodities or items that don't need protection from the weather, they can travel in open top cars. And there's a couple examples in the graphic there. And there are about 3 types of open top cars that you would see regularly: flat cars, gondolas, and hoppers. 3 classes of open top cars that I work with. All right, let's look at some of my flat car loads. This is the Santa Fe FTN, FT for flat, first letter, last letter of the word. And it became a bulkhead flat car. It was originally built as a 50-footer, then they extended it to 53 feet, 6 inches, and put bulkheads on it. And the size of the bulkheads was greater than that 3.5-foot extension, reduced the interior dimension of the car to 47 feet. For this car, I contacted a guy named Don Jaeger. It might be Jaeger, it might be Jaeger. I'm not clear on that, and pardon me if I'm pronouncing it wrong. He makes kit loads for open top cars. It could be center beam flat cars. It could be open flat cars like this. It could be gondolas. And they're made and sized for pretty much all the available ready to run cars. Something you might buy from Atlas or Athearn or Walthers, that group. This car had a different size. He also builds kits. You can build these same loads yourselves. But I contacted him because I was concerned about the dimensions that are available from his products. And he said, Bruce, for $5 more, I will custom build you a load, whatever size and whatever type you want. So for $5 over the cost of one of his regular kits, he built me this custom load. It's a wrapped lumber load, And I grew up outside Chicago, and Heinz Lumber Company was a big, well-known locally lumber company up there. So he had Heinz lumber wrap available. So that's what I chose. And here's the car with the lumber load he built for me. Another one, an FTJ class car, just a plain open flat car. I took some sheet stock, I painted it in a zinc chromate primer, and with banding strips and wood to sort of cradle the load, support it so forklifts could get their tines underneath it there. There's a load for a flat car, just sheet material, steel plates. Here's a set of 3 flat cars that's got a deck bridge girder on it. And the girder is greater than the length of one flat car, so of course it overhangs, and they put 2 idler flats at either end. The wood crates, scratch built, just carrying machinery parts or other construction items that happen to go along with it. The first gondola. This is a GA gondola, 61 class car, and last June I showed you how I built this car and how I built a load of railroad ties to go in the car. And that's what it looked like when it was complete. Cars don't always travel loaded. I can take the load out of this car. I just turn it upside down and the load drops out. And if the car is running empty, I wanted the interior to look like a normal interior of a gondola that time would be. And keeping in mind these war emergency cars, some lasted all the way through to the early 70s. I'm in 1967. I've got documentation that shows that some of these were still active on the Santa Fe. I had to finish the car in a well-worn, used wood appearance. And that's what it ended up with looking like inside when the load's not in the car. So if I take the load out, it still looks realistic. Here's a GA69 class car, another mill class gondola from the Santa Fe. I found this photograph of a car that had a telephone pole load in it. And I said, well, this wouldn't be too hard to prepare as a load for a car. A company called Rick's makes telephone poles. They're tapered. You could probably use dowel stock and try and taper it yourself, but I figured that'd take forever to do all these poles. I think there's 64 poles in this stack. That's what the load looks like, banded in a few spots to hold parts of it together. And you put it in the car and it looks like that. And just like my tie load in the last gondola, if you want to take this load out, you just pick it up, it comes out of the car, and I've got the interior finished. This happens to be an all metal car, so it's finished, looks like metal. Another one here, an 87 class car. I went to American Model Builders, looked over what they had available, and they make a laser kit for this pipe load. And it's a relatively large diameter piece of pipe. The pipe itself is plastic, but everything else, the flanges and the cover plates on the end of the pipe and all the blocking and bracing that hold it in place is laser cut wood. And all you had to do was paint the pipe. I did that in a zinc chromate color and put it in a gondola. We got another load ready to go there. Some hoppers. Okay, on my railroad, I've got 2 dedicated strings of hoppers, and I've got a mine on the railroad, and that's the industry. And it mines some kind of ore that when it's out of the ground, it can travel in a hopper car. One string is empty hoppers, and I stage them at the mine ready for loading. And you can see this is the front end of the mine here. The cars are sticking out. Here's the back end. One of them is under the tipple part there. One of them is still inside, ready to be loaded with the ore commodity, whatever that might be. And the other string, and I swap these out with a local freight train every once in a while. These depict loaded cars. They're the front end, they're pushed through. Actually, I have a car puller. And the car puller, in lieu of an engine, pulls the cars through the loading facility here. And here's the loaded hoppers. Well, the load I made, instead of filling up the entire hopper with the load ore material, I put a little sheet of styrene in there, put the load material on top of it, poured it in, spread it out like it looked like it got dumped into the car, secured it in place with white glue, and that's what it looks like when it's finished. On the other hand, my empty hoppers, the ones that are staged for loading or running empty at the time, what do you do with those cars? Well, in the past, or currently even, the loaded cars, you don't see the interior, but in the past, the unloaded cars, you could see down into the interior. And what I usually did is I just took any kind of dirty looking gray, black, brown paint, mixed some up, spread some colors around on it, and just made it look dirty inside. But I checked with a couple of real railroaders who had experience in this area, and they agreed with me, or they even, kind of suggested it to me. Back in the 60s, when these cars were made out of steel, aluminum cars hadn't really come along into big use yet. Loading these materials in the car and unloading them out the bottom of the car, as the load scraped along the metal surface, it would eventually scrape the paint off the metal down to the bare silvery finish of the metal. So to investigate how to replicate this, I heard of a paint product called hammered silver, and it produces a rough looking finish. It's not a nice, smooth, clean, silvery finish. And I said, this is what I need to get to try and finish the inside of these cars. That little picture of the piece of pipe on the left is kind of generally what it looks like when it's sprayed on. I'm not endorsing any particular brand, but the brand I found was Rust-Oleum, found it in one of the home stores here. Hammered silver comes in this spray can, and like elephants, it also comes in quarts and gallons. But I figured if I had to buy that much of it, it'd be enough for every Division 8 guy for the next 100 years to treat the inside of his open cars if they wanted to do that. So that's what I chose to use. Now, to put it in, I just made a simple mask around the top edges of the car using masking tape and paper. You can see inside that one how it appeared before I started this project. It just looked kind of dirty inside there. And then I sprayed the hammered silver paint on the interior. Important thing in this part here to realize is the spray paint direct out of the can is pretty much uncontrollable in area and volume for small surfaces like this. So another technique I developed probably 10 years or so ago using a similar process for something else. Took a little glass jar, gave it about 2 or 3 seconds worth of spray from the spray can, which gives you a little liquid fluid in the jar, and then transferred that into the cup on my airbrush and sprayed the interior of the car in a controlled, regulated manner that I felt appropriate. And I did a little heavier spray on the on the horizontal surfaces, the slope sheets where the material would rub harder, and a little less on the sides of the inside of the car where the wear wouldn't be as significant. Flat car loads. A company called Plastruct makes shapes, plastic shapes of lots of things that can be adapted for loads. This one is a piece of tubing with end caps and a couple pipe fittings attached to it. And on the right, we have an electric motor with a pump system. And I took this Wabash 50-foot flat car, anchored them down, blocked and braced them, tied them down, and made a load for a flat car like that. The car on the right is a Funaro and Camerlingo Pennsylvania Railroad heavy-duty depressed center flat car. And the load is whoever or whatever you want to call it. In actuality, it's an empty plastic bottle that had decal setting solution in it. And on the end, the left end, as we view it here, I put some sheet styrene and some pieces of pipe fittings on it just to make it look like it's something other than a bottle. The tarp that covers it is a piece of plastic wrap, like saran wrap or something like that, spray painted, in this case blue. And from the internet, I printed it out and desized a couple of General Electric logos, slapped them on the side. This could be a nuclear reactor component. It could be a turbine component for a power plant. Who knows? Over on the left, that happens to be a lead sinker that you put into a masonry wall before you put a lag bolt into it. Painted, a couple of features put on it, and a tarp. Here we have heavy equipment loads traveling on some flat cars. You can probably find these in kids' toy store or wherever anymore. I think these happen to be old Matchbox items, but they fit on flat cars the right scale to make a load. Here's another prototype photograph, happens to be another Santa Fe bulkhead flat car. It's got a wrapped load of drywall material on it. So I took that picture, and I had another bulkhead flat car from Santa Fe available, and I made up that. A little piece of wood wrapped in white paper, and then the black saran wrap pasted over it to give it that extra wrapped, and the tie downs wrapped around the car.
Bruce, it looks like you accidentally muted yourself.
Okay, am I back on?
No, I did
Yeah.
it wrong. Cursing wrong. Bruce, I just want, what did you use for your tie wraps on that load?
You can get from drafting in art stores, you can get very narrow down to a 64th inch tape, and it comes in various colors. It's called chart tape, I think is what the real name of it is. And I just cut that. I have in the past taken very narrow, like 0.020 strip styrene, painted it and wrapped it around too. But I found this chart tape seemed to work a lot easier. You attach it, stick it down in the stake pocket on the side, wrap it around, stick it in the stake pocket on the other side, maybe put a drop of ACC on it to hold it in place. It does have adhesive on the back because people, drafters and whatever, draw charts with it. So
Okay.
that's
Is
the
that very similar to like a pinstriping tape?
Yeah.
I guess it could be, sure.
Okay.
But I think the name that this goes by, not the brand name, but it's just called chart tape.
The brand name is Chart Pack, CHARTPAK.
Okay. And
Bruce, while you're interrupted there, could you comment on the saran wrap you're using? How are you attaching that to your loads? Like with the blue tarps and this here?
just generally with a tiny dab, maybe of goo or something on the back at the corners.
Okay.
Nothing that's going to add a lot of bulk to it or anything, just something to hold it in place against hurricane winds or whatever else might come along and it would blow it away. Trying and keep things simple sometimes. And I put my whole mind to it, my simple mind, and come up with stuff like that. Okay to move on?
Yep.
All right. Well, some gondola loads. This is an Athearn Santa Fe gondola, again from Plastruct, some structural steel shapes in it. We're having technical difficulties here, I guess. Here's a Pennsylvania Railroad gondola. Tangent has produced wrapped steel coils, although I'm sure you could make them yourself out of tubing of some kind. And they're laying in trough material. There's two sloped sheets of plastic which represent the metal, but the coils kind of nestle down into on the interior of the car. There's a couple of Proto 2000 Burlington gondolas with boom crane segments tied into it as a load. And I've got those anchored with metal rods running up and beams across the top to hold the load in place in the car. Here's another gondola carrying concrete culvert material. And just right over the word Pacific, you can see I've got wood cradles in there. I could haul 4. This one just happens to be handling 3 of them at the time. Concrete culverts. Here's a flat car, Southern Pacific, mounted into a Southern Pacific gondola. And the story I made up about this is that the flat car was damaged offline someplace. And the Southern Pacific routed a gondola over there to the host railroad at the time, put that flat car in the gondola and send it back to us. And it happens to be traveling over Santa Fe rails right now, going to the next interchange point with the Southern Pacific, where it can be returned to them and sent to their shops, either for repair or disposition. Gondola filled with gravel. Pretty simple. Made the same way I do the hoppers. I put a sheet of styrene just down from the top of the gondola and then pack the gravel material in, secure it with diluted white glue. Some hoppers. These are pretty much right out of the box. This came from Tangent, an L&N gondola hauling coal. This is Katy, Frisco gondola hauling coal again. I forget if Utah was Exact Rail or Tangent. It might be Tangent, another gondola, hopper car hauling coal. If you look in the background on these pictures, I tend to feature my Santa Fe equipment, but you can see I've got equipment from lots of other railroads too. And of course, some cars, they are open top cars, but they run without loads. There's a 60-foot flat car, Missouri Pacific, nothing on it right now. a rock gondola, nothing in it. One of my empty Santa Fe hoppers, post silver treatment on the inside. And there's the string of 5 of them that I have. I just had them shunted off on the yard lead there. And the final one, another 60-foot flat car here, some more pieces from Plastruct, another piece of tubing with end caps and some pipe fittings mounted on it, some blocking and bracing on the deck to hold it in place, and strapping material to hold it anchored to the flat car deck. And that's the last one I've got to show you. I'll take questions from anybody that's interested or has anything they want to add to it there.
Bruce,
before we get started with questions, would you stop sharing your screen, please? Then we can see everybody talking.